Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for welcoming me today. As was said, I'm a sociologist, and for about 10 years now, I've got one main research topic, and I study science and social inequalities before science. And in the recent years, I've been focusing a bit more on math. And I guess my main research question is to try and understand why some people are interested in science and then more specifically math and want to study it and want to make it their job, while for other people it pretty quickly becomes a problem, especially at school. I'm sure you know that. In French schools specifically, math is one of the most hated subjects for children. Why is that? Why do some of us develop this state, this interest in science, and others are just quickly disgusted or excluded? So that is the starting point of my research. And actually, well, it is a good question for sociology and for a sociologist, because as I'm sure you've guessed, this is not arbitrary. It's not due to chance. So it's not someone is born, you roll a dice, you will like math, you won't. That's actually the name of the first book that I wrote. It's called in French, La bosse des maths n'existe pas. A rough translation would be, no one is naturally good at math. So yeah, it's not by chance. It's not arbitrary who likes and is interested in science and who isn't. And I wanted to start again at that beginning with you by providing some context coming from figures that I will expose about. It's actually a very easy starting point. We take the population as a whole, everyone, and then we look at who is actually studying math, and then who actually becomes a math professional. And then we compare the two populations, and we see who is missing, what type of people are missing. And that is the starting point and the context I will start with. We will see that actually at least 3 kinds of people are missing in people who practice math during their studies and then as professionals. Obviously women, we all know about it, but also it's known but less discussed, people from the working classes and people from racial minorities. So I will first start by giving you just key figures for these 3 kinds of inequalities, because they are known, but not all of us know the proportion of these inequalities and relative absence, for instance, of women. So, starting with gender inequalities, and the figures for gender come from the French context. So, at the beginning of high school in France, we have a little bit more of female students. This is because, as you may know, at the beginning of the general high school, there is a first possible choice in high school. You can go to a professional or technical high school, or you can go to a general high school. So this is for general high school, and since female students tend to perform a little better during their studies, especially in middle school, there are actually a bit more of them at the beginning of the general high school. So we have 54% of girls in seconde at the beginning of general high school. But then if you look at the students who are still studying a lot of math, and a lot of math here is more than 5 hours a week, if you look at them in terminal, so at 18 years old, then you have 32% of girls students. It's not too bad, it's close to 50-50, but compared with the 54% at the beginning, it means that we lost some of them in the process. And this actually goes on, meaning that at each following step of the studies and then careers in math, we lose a little bit of the women students and then professional. So here I picked 2 indicators. I could have picked others, but I picked, and you will see why, the classe préparatoire. So the preparatory classes that we have in French, it's a very specific French thing. There are 32% of girls in our classe préparatoire. It's actually less in the one specializing in math and physics and engineering. So today it's 22% of girls in MPSI, for those who know it. And then the next step would be the grandes écoles, so the top schools that are another specificity of the French higher ed system. So schools like Polytechnique, the École Normale Supérieure, the ENS, Centrale, Les Mines, etc. All put together, they have 18% of girls, all of them. I think the lowest would be, recently it's been 15% and the highest is at 20%. So what happens with girls give you a good idea of what sociologists called the leaky pipeline. So it's a metaphor to explain the fact that if you start at the beginning of studies in math and then you go on step by step, it's like you have a leaky pipeline and women disappear as if they were leaks, and so you don't find as many of them at the end that you do at the beginning. Just an indication here, I picked figures for grandes écoles and classe préparatoire because, as we will see a little bit today, but mostly tomorrow, those are the best way to actually become a professional mathematician. Because many mathematicians are recruited from people who went through classe préparatoire and also grandes écoles, so it made sense to look at these particular spots to get the figures at the beginning. But if you look at universities, and for instance math in universities, you get similar figures, around 30% of women in those classes. So these is gender inequalities, and by now I think they are pretty well known and pretty discussed. It's the most discussed inequality in front of science. I'm sure if you are French, you've heard of the big plan filles et maths that the government recently implemented, so this is really well known. What is, I think, less known and less discussed is the other type of social inequalities that we have, and particularly class inequalities. So, what I mean by class inequalities is that if you compare the general population with students who still study math and then professionals, then you don't have the same characteristics in the two populations. And you don't find the same social classes. So, it's quite hard to define social classes, and we have many definitions in sociology about what a social class is. We even have lengthy papers about do they still exist or not? Is it a too old concept? Do we still live in a society that is divided by class? We have pretty long papers and books about it, but I think the short answer is yes. It still is relevant to talk about class today, especially in France. We have debates about how to define class, but today and tomorrow, I will be using a pretty consensual definition of class, and I will be using 3 different classes, so 3 categories. I will be talking about the working classes, I will be talking about the middle or intermediary classes, and then the upper classes. And the definition I use for them is the same that is used to make national statistics in France. So if you know the institute, the INSEE, who makes the national statistics, they use the same definition. What we call the working classes are people whose parents are or were workers, so blue-collar workers, or employees, so ouvriers and employés. We have the middle classes with the people who are, whose parents are or were from the intermediary professions. So this is, for instance, people who have technical jobs, so techniciens, but also intermediary professions such as nurses or primary school teachers. So these are the intermediary classes. And then you have the upper classes, and we say people are from the upper classes when their parents are or were from intellectual professions, such as, for instance, being an artist or being a journalist or being a university professor or even a high school professor. These are all considered intellectual professions. Or if your parents were managers or executive. So this is a very simple and broad definition. The issue we have is that not everybody uses this definition, and particularly the education government has a slightly different definition. So when I give you school statistics, you may see other words, and sometimes I have to say underprivileged students, because the Ministry of Education uses this label. It's pretty much the same as working class, so I'm using both of them kind of indifferently, but there are some debates about the definition. Anyway, the working classes, so if you followed who has parents who were workers or employees, it's not a minority, right? It's pretty much a third of the French population, and it's actually almost a third of the students who start high school. So it's a lot of the students. And yet, we have a huge loss between the beginning of high school and students who are still studying, again, more than 5 hours of math when they are 18 years old, because amongst this group of students, you only find 17% of students coming from the working classes. So they become a minority very, very quickly. And then, so the big loss for students from the working class is actually during high school. There is still a little loss afterwards, because as you can see, you will only find 11% of them in the classe préparatoire, the preparatory classes, and then it's less than 10% of them in the top school, the grandes écoles. So we have the same leaky pipeline that we have for gender. Yeah?
What is the percentage of the working class in the total population?
Around a third. Depending on who makes the calculation, between 33 and 35%.
Yes, I have a question. So these are recent figures?
Yes.
Do you know if it used to be different? Because we often hear that before class préparatoire were social ladder and everything.
Oh. I'm not sure about the figures for the classe préparatoire, but as we will see tomorrow, it got worse since the high school reform. So it got, who could have guessed? So, but these are the figures for high school. I don't know about the classe préparatoire themselves. I don't know if they ever were a social ladder. I'm not sure. Maybe it was better, I'm not sure. Yeah. Yes.
How much it is less than 10%? I mean, if it's 10%, it's a small loss, but if it's 5%, it's already the people who disappear.
Yeah, we don't really know, because data for this particular indicator is very poor. We have good data for sex, worse data for class, and no data for race. That's pretty much it. So we have very, very poor data for class, especially in higher education, because France doesn't really track this data. So that's why I have to say less than 10%, between 5 and 10 from what we know. And also, another question you may have is, what about girls from the working class? We don't know, because we don't have intersectional data, so we have no way of knowing how many of the working class students are girls and vice versa. So this is an issue we have. So moving on about the no data situation, race inequalities. We do know that there is racial discrimination in the French system, but we have no way of knowing how much, because actually in most cases providing statistics about racial or ethnical belonging is forbidden in France. It can be done under certain circumstances, so if you want to do that, you have to ask for authorization in a special committee, and so we have a few studies that do manage to do it, and then there is a lot of conditions. For instance, you can ask people to identify themselves, but you cannot identify them. So a lot of rules. So we have very, very lacking data, and none, from what I know, for higher education, and none related to participation in math and science. So, as a proxy, it's not very satisfactory, but I just put the numbers for the one of the documented case, which is the US. We also have pretty good data from England, for instance. But I just picked the US as an example, and I picked one particular case, and that's the case of the black students. So it was the data is from 2021 for the high schoolers and 2018 for the bachelors. So the US, you have 17% of black students in high school. Then if you look at who is still studying math at 18, so the equivalent of our terminal, it's 11% of the students. And then when you look at the undergrads, the bachelors, then it falls to 5%. From the most recent data, black PhD students in math is supposed to be around 1% of the students. So this is the context. We are going to talk about these three kinds of inequalities. We're going to talk about gender, and about class, and about race. We are doing gender today, class and race tomorrow. So I will focus a little bit more on gender, and tell you more about my plan also later on. But to give you a little bit more context about gender, and so you seem to know it, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the recent reform we had in the French high school. I'm sure you've all heard about this special reform. You may have heard that it had a bad effect on the participation of girls in math and science. You may have heard also of former Education Ministry Jean-Michel Blanquer saying it had a good effect. No, absolutely not. We have damaging evidence that the changes that were made to the way the French high school works were actually very damaging for girls, and it's the equivalent of a 25 years setback. I think this is interesting because, as I mentioned, I've been doing this kind of talks for about 10 years now. And when I started, it was around 2015, usually there was someone in the audience, someone was an older, important man, and he would raise his hand and say, "Please, miss." Always a good starting point. Be patient. Be patient. Sure, women have been excluded from science for a long time. But it's open now. Just wait a little bit, and things will be all right. At that point, I would say, well, we have to be very, very patient because things have been at a status quo and not moving for about 20 years now. Since 2019, I can change my answer and say, well, no, we have been going backwards. We have actually been losing ground. And so you can see in the graph on the right what I was saying, because this here you can see how things were at a status quo and not moving for about 20 years, starting at the beginning of the 21st century, and how it dropped when the high school was reformed. So this graph, and I must thank my colleague Mélanie Guénet. She does the plotting from the data, and the data is the data we have from the Ministry of Education. She does all the plotting. So here you can see that we had a good situation. It was the parity was almost there in high school, and then we had a drop after high school. But since the reform, we have a drop during high school. So we lost a lot of female students. Yes.
What was the exact reform?
Oh, so beforehand, French students in the general high school they had to choose between three possibilities. They could study the scientific pathway, and if you choose science, then you had necessarily math and physics and chemistry and biology, life sciences. Or you could do a literary pathway, or you could do an economics and social studies. Now, students can mix and match disciplines, but in the third year of high school, they have to keep two only. So no one can do math and physics and chemistry and life sciences. At the end, they have to pick 2 out of 3. And so this made things difficult, especially for girls. One explanation is that, as we'll see, many girls aspire to go into the life sciences, and especially to become doctors. And so when they have to choose 2 out of 3, well, sometimes even the medical universities say, well, pick physics and chemistry and life sciences and drop math, because it makes sense in a way that to become a doctor, it would be better to study that. So this change caused the drop in students studying math. And as you can see from the first graph, it happened for boys as well. So less students are studying math than before because of this change between of the way you pick your subjects. So before, it was a very small minority of male students, only 6%, that did not study math anymore when they were 16 years old. Now it's a quarter of them. But as you can see, the effect is way bigger for girls, because before, less than 20% had dropped math at 16, and after the reform, it was almost half of the female student population that had stopped studying math. So yeah, things are not getting better at all. And these are really consolidated figures, and we know that this, for instance, is having consequences for the first school to pay the price in higher ed are actually the engineering schools. So we are seeing a drop in female application in engineering schools now.
So what's the reaction of the Ministry of Education when they are faced with such figures?
So a very interesting history about this reform. When the reform was announced, everyone who knew anything about it said that this was going to be the consequence. There was historians, sociologists, and scientists of education were interviewed, and they all said this is going to be terrible for women and for the working class. And the ministry said, well, thank you for telling us. And they went ahead. Afterwards, the ministry, Jean-Michel Blanquer, namely, has been repeatedly saying that there is no effect. He went, there was an audition at the Senate. He went and said, my reform had no damaging effect. And the senators were like, well. And he was like, no. That's it. No, there is. But actually, if we need to talk about it, the reform had the intended effect, because the main goal was actually to reduce the number of students who study math, because we don't have enough math teachers. So it worked, in a way. Moving on from high school to professionals, obviously, these have an effect on later careers. And so if we look at women in a professional context in France in math, then a few key figures again. Today, 2 years back, we had 22% of women amongst lecturers, maîtres et maîtresses de conférences, and professors in French universities. One specificity of math is actually for the subfield called Mathématiques pure, so pure mathematics. It has the privilege of being the least feminized subject of the French university. So it's at the top 3 you have math and physics, pretty much. What's interesting, again, is that there has been absolutely no progress for about 25 years. And so you can see that this plot, it was made by an organization called Mathématiques, who documents the evolution of this issue. And so they call this the pancake. It's not moving. As you can see, we are between 20 and 22, maybe 23% of women in French universities in math. It started in 1996, and it was updated last, I think, in 2021. And to give you another anecdote, one of the first time I presented this particular graph, I was a PhD student and I was quite young, and then a man in the audience was like, "Miss, no." He said no. And he said, if you had at least a basic knowledge of mathematics, you would not show a plot like that, because you would know that it's too regular to be possible. And I was quite impressed. I was young. He was a very important man. He was the former president of a very important university or school or whatever. So I was very impressed, and I was like, well, I did not check. I did not do the plot myself. I borrowed it from Femmes et Mathématiques. Maybe they made a mistake. I mean, they are women mathematicians. Maybe they got the figures wrong. Maybe they did the plotting wrong. So I spent my evening, the fun life of a sociologist, I spent my evening gathering back all the data from the Ministry of Research and Higher Education, and to check year by year if the data was true. And yes, it is. And this regularity, the fact that it doesn't move, is actually a very interesting proof of the sociological fact that we have had the same situation for women in math for about 30 years now, and it stays at 21%, sometimes going up to 22 or 23.
So it went up. If you wait for 2,000 years, maybe?
That's a perfect transition because they actually did the calculation. So I have the year. So we have a very good news for women, but in applied math only, because applied math is way more open to women, and it goes up quietly. Parity will be reached in 2270. So none of us will be here to see it, probably. And that's the good news, because there is some bad news for women professors in pure mathematics. If things go on the way they do, now there is less than 10% of them. It's a very small population, obviously. If things don't change, they will have disappeared completely in 2075. So some of us will be here to witness their disappearance. Someone else had a question?
Yeah, it was just to be sure, but this graph is pure and applied math?
Yes.
Okay.
It's together, and it's also both lecturers and professors.
And second question, have you data after 2021?
I think the data exists, but it has not been yet plotted by Femme and Math, because I checked this morning. Yes.
Do you have data in computer science?
Yes. Not in my head, but it exists. All the data is actually available. The Ministry of Research and Higher Ed provides all this data, but Femme et Math they do a huge job actually of taking the data, doing the graphs and plots. So yeah, but yeah, it exists for computer science. I'm sure someone has done it, but from what I know, it's not worse. It cannot be worse than pure math, because they are the top one. And from memory, the list is actually on the website of Femme et Math. And from what I remember, the top three, you have pure mathematics, then you have electronics. I'm not sure computer science is there, but maybe, I think it's theoretical physics on the top three. And then can you guess which humanity disciplines are up there with less than 50% women? Yeah. Yes, philosophy, and there is a second one, less known. History? No. No, it's theology. Yeah. No women in math, no women to think, and no women to think about God. Come on. Any other questions about the figures in the context? All right. So that was just to give us common ground, to know what we are talking about when we talk about the underrepresentation of women or people from the working classes or people from minorities in science and in math. What I'm going to tell you next actually comes from a very concrete research project. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit more about that, because that is one of the specificity of my science, of sociology. Normally, when sociology is well done, it's always grounded on empirical field work. So you always have a specific study, you always have field work to support what you are saying. And I'm going to talk about methodology a little bit more in a few minutes. What is very nice today is that the research project I'm basing my talk on was actually carried out here in the CIRM. So I had the opportunity to do the research project here in the CIRM, and actually I wrote part of the papers and book also here in the CIRM. So I'm really happy to be here again. The project I did was actually a project around a math camp you may have heard of called Les Cigales. And it's a math camp that is reserved for teenage girls, 16 years old. It was created by some of your colleagues here, so colleagues from Aix-Marseille University, both mathematicians and computer scientists. And they came together to create this math camp. And the aim was to have this camp only for girls, only for teenagers in première. It's hosted here in the CIRM, and in the morning the girls would, it's still going on, so in the morning the girls work on math problems that are as close as possible as real research problems. So it's not like the math they would do in high school with their teachers, it's as close as possible as the math you do as researchers. In the afternoon, they do sports, or they have meetings, for instance, with engineers or with female scientists, and they have conferences, etc. And for 2 editions, this has been going on for 5 or 6 years now, for 2 editions, there was an onboard sociological study. Because I was lucky enough to be invited by one of the members of the organizing team, a math researcher called Olga Paris-Romeskevich. And she had seen my previous work. Previously, I was working on the way that children relate to science. And so she had seen this work, and she invited me to come and study the math camp, because the team wanted to know if they were actually doing a good job, if what they were proposing to the girls was actually working, if it was a good idea to have something for girls only, and if they did, more good than bad. And so this is the sociological study that we did. I was accompanied by a colleague of mine called Alice Pavy, so there were 2 of us, 2 sociologists. And so we designed a study that actually uses most of the tools that we have in sociology to gather data. So first, we did some observation. So observation really means that you are in the same place as the people you are studying, and you actually spend your time there and take notes. So we have field journals. We prepare kind of a grid of questions and of things to observe based on our hypothesis and research questions beforehand. And then we go in and we take notes, for instance, on what kinds of people are there, how are they using the space, who is sitting where, what do people say to one another. So we studied interactions between the girls themselves, but also between the girls and the adults. So the male researchers, the female researchers, but also anyone who was there at CIRM. So we did 2 weeks of observation from morning to night. This was a very, very rich observation. Sadly, I was never able to use all of it in the things I published later on, because some of it was amazing but of little scientific interest. But if you ever ask yourself, yes, there has been some twerking here at CIRM, and also some very nice dancing to La Tribu de Dana. In the auditorium, not this one, the other one. Useless scientifically, very fun. Another method that we used was the interviews. This is one of the main methods we have when we do qualitative sociology. So interviews, again, you have a pre-made grid of questions that you want to ask people, and then you sit with them. We sit with the girls individually. And the advantage is that you can follow your grid of questions, but then if needed, you can divert from it, because it's a discussion, so you follow also where this discussion is going. We interviewed 45 girls, depending on how much they had to say. It lasted between 45 minutes and an hour, 2 hours, sorry. And the questions that we had were about their background, their families, but also their school experience, and obviously the way that they related to math and science. I will not really use that today, but we also did some corpus analysis. It's also to show that the many tools we can use. So corpus analysis is when you study documents. So you study texts or images, and there we had interesting cover letters and the files of the participants. So we did I also have a little study about how, when you are a 16-year-old girl, how do you write a letter saying, I really like math and I want to come to your camp? How do you show your love for math? And then when you are a researcher, how do you read a letter and try to pick the right candidate? What do you look for? What kind of language do you look for? Again, a smaller part of the methodology. We had questionnaires at the end of the camp, just a few questions. I just wanted to mention it here because, and we can discuss that if you want. I've already started discussing it with some of you. But the epistemology of sociology is very different from the one that you have, obviously, in math. It's also pretty different from the one that exists in the natural sciences, even though it's partially based on it. And so, if you want, we can discuss the several ways that we create knowledge in sociology. And one of the particularities that we have is that we can do qualitative research or quantitative research. And so when we do quantitative research, it's usually by questionnaires, but not necessarily. It's just by any way you can gather a lot of data, but a lot of information on a lot of people, but then the information is obviously quite restricted because it's one indicator or one question. But then you can do statistical analysis, and then we are back on things that you know very well. Yes?
You said that you studied the cover letters from the participants.
Yes.
So the girls who were selected for the event, right?
Yes.
Does that not introduce some kind of survivor bias in the study, in the sense that you don't have access to the letter of the girls who were rejected, or is that not important for you?
Oh, yeah. No. Those girls are not representative of anything. They are not normal or typical or anything. And actually, it's a good link to the. But that cannot be the case in a qualitative study. In a qualitative study, you usually study between 20 and, 100 people. So you have no way of having a representative sample. It's impossible. So you don't even look for representation. You try to explain who's your population, and that's why, and I'll go very briefly about it. We can talk about it more afterwards if you want, but usually in sociology, we do not try to find causal links between phenomena when we are doing qualitative studies, because that's actually not what you can find. If you study 30 or 40 people, you have no way of saying, well, this event was caused by that, because that's too little a sample. So what we usually say is that when we are doing quantitative sociology, quantitative studies, then we are close to the way other natural science work, and we try to find causes and to put in evidence causal links. But when you are doing qualitative studies, then what you are looking for is a more comprehensive approach. So you are trying to find the meaning of things for people. So it's not about trying to see the causal links, it's more about trying to give meaning and understanding what it means for someone to be in a certain position. So as you will probably see, I try to always bring both. If we can, the best way to understand what goes on in the human society is to have both quantitative studies, qualitative studies, and data coming from different entry points, and then you have an idea of causal relations, but also beyond that of what it means for people to be in a certain position. But yeah, and I will tell you a bit more about the girls in the sample in a minute. But it's not representative of anything. Yeah.
The cover letters are just from the girls
Yes.
who are participating.
Yes.
The ones that were not selected.
Oh no, we had the one that were not selected as well. But it was not that many.
Okay.
It was not that many. I think it was maybe 10 girls were not selected. because the team of researchers did not want to leave anyone on the spot. So usually if some girls were rejected, they were accepted to the next edition, so that they tried not to say no to anyone.
That's why you only have letters from your participants.
Yes.
All of them.
Almost. I think 1 or 2 did not get in, but it's not a competitive math camp. It's Any other questions? So, at that point, we gathered a lot of data on the way that teenage girls related to math, but also interesting data on the way they interacted with the researchers, and it was becoming a quite interesting study. So I was with my colleague, sociologist Alice Pavy, and there was also the mathematician Olga Paris-Romaskevich, and at some point we figured that it would be a pity not to do anything with the data and with the results that we were starting to get from this study. Because usually what we do as researchers in sociology is what kind of all researchers do. We gather the data, then we go into analysis mode. It takes 1 year or 2 years to do a nice paper, and then we try to get the paper published. And then maybe 5 or 6 years later, you have a nice paper that nobody will read. It's usually what happens. I don't know if anyone here has ever read a sociological paper. Yay, thank you. Well, we have 2 of you. Wow. 3, oh wow. But then again, you are scientists, so it's expected, right? No, it's really hard to get sociological papers and results in the real world, to have anyone read it. So we decided to do something with our results that would be accessible to the people involved. And that meant the teenage girls, but it also meant our colleagues in math and computer science. So then my colleagues and I were a little mean. We figured that the understanding of sociology of a teenage girl and a fellow mathematician would be the same, and that we could make 1 book for everyone. I think it's true. So we decided to make a book that would be accessible to everyone, and that became the book known as Matters, where we brought together sociology, mathematics, obviously feminism and girl, but also that's when Claire Marc came to the team. And Claire is an illustrator, but she's also a scientific facilitator. If you are French, you may have seen her work. She's doing this collection for the CNRS edition. She did Tout comprendre ou presque sur le climat. And now she has been doing a series of Tout comprendre ou presque, recently sur l'IA and physique quantique. And so she has been doing a lot of work mediating and facilitating science work. She's the one who did all the illustration that you've been seeing from the beginning. So what we did was create this sociological book. I worked on it for the sociological part, just as I would have worked on a traditional sociological paper or traditional university book. So with the same methodology, and so bringing in my results from the field study, but also all the literature that I know of and previous studies made by my colleagues internationally. Obviously, Claire made the illustrations. It's also a math book because Olga Paris-Romaskevich picked on the problems that had been given to the girls and to put them in the book, so you can actually do some math while you are reading it. And then obviously it's all linked by this feminist approach of understanding and also supporting girls and women in math. So obviously, I'm not the one who will be talking about the open problems, but I can talk to you about the sociological aspects. And what we did in this book, and this has been, I must say, quite influenced by Claire, because Claire had been working in her books with this kind of questions and answers with chapters. And I thought it was very interesting because it's a way to force us as scientists to just provide answers and not go around saying, you know, things are complicated. No, we are trying to just give an answer to specific questions. And we picked, I picked these different questions to try and bring different insights on what happens to girls, but also other underrepresented populations in math. So there is first a question about the family, and And actually, do you need to have a scientific background and to come from a scientific family to succeed in math? And these questions was actually brought forward by some of them. As you said, the girls in the camp were not representative of the general population. Actually, when you do an open call for teenage girls to come to a math camp, you get a lot of math teachers' daughters. And also a lot of daughters of engineers. So yeah, it's linked to a social phenomenon. There are two questions that are linked. One is about intelligence. Do you have to be intelligent, and what kind of intelligence to succeed in math? And then, is that something that is learned, or is that something that is innate to you? There is a question about careers, and especially about the difference between formal and logical sciences, such as math or computer sciences, and then life sciences, where you have way more girls. As you may know, we have more than 70% of girls studying medicine in France right now. It's also, they are also the majority in chemistry, for instance, and biology. There is a specific chapter about computer sciences, because in some cases the situation is even worse. Especially in high school, girls are really the minority in computer sciences. What's wrong, actually, with computer sciences? A question about the issue of self-confidence, because recently this has been the main explanation put forward to explain the absence of girls in science and math, the fact that they lack self-esteem, they do not trust their own capacities. Given what I was saying before, there is one question about elitism and one question about racism. And then the two last questions try to explore the solutions that may be given to the problem. So one is the creation of single-sex settings. Does it work to have single-sex meetings, camps, or so on? And then role models. This has also been presented as a solution to the problem. Does it actually work to have role models for girls in science? As I was saying, to give you a little bit more information about the girls that are part of the study, there are 45 of them. They are all very interested in math, so this makes them abnormal, let's say, compared to the general population of 16 years old. Also, given what was said, when no effort was made to try and recruit specific profiles, most of the girls who presented themselves and wanted to come to the math camp were from privileged backgrounds. As I'd said, so many daughters of math teachers and engineers, but also teachers. But yet, still some of them were from the middle class and the working class. This brings me to the end of the introduction, and so what I wanted to do today and tomorrow is actually explore the three main causes for discrimination in math. So we're going to talk about sexism and elitism and racism. I'm really glad I have the time to do all three, because I usually have to make people pick one, and no one ever picks racism. So it doesn't get done, and usually we only talk about sexism because it has become the most politically correct issue to talk about. We usually don't talk about the other ones. But so we are going to do all three of them. I will talk about sexism today, and we will tackle elitism and racism tomorrow. So, you know, a fun course. Any questions on the methodology or things like that before I go into the results for the issue on sexism? All good? All right. So, there are many ways to try and explain the underrepresentation of girls and women in math, but I wanted to pick one angle for this in the book and for today, and that is the angle of self-confidence and then self-censorship. Because as I was saying, recently, this has been presented as the main explanation. So when we ask, why do we lack girls and women in math, then the answer is often, well, because they self-censor, they have issues feeling good enough, and they usually don't apply and they don't come to us, and so we are lacking just the population of girls that we would want to. This has actually some basis. So we have a lot of studies that do prove that there exists a lack of self-confidence, and that girls indeed underestimate their capacity. So yeah, we have studies about that, and I wanted to provide 2 examples, but we have many, many converging studies about that. So I wanted to mention 2 studies, and they are actually not only on French students, they are actually on international students. You may have heard of the international studies we have for students. One is for students of 15 years old. It's called PISA. Usually when the results are published, there are papers in the press saying PISA says we are so bad at pretty much everything. It's not perfect, but it's good because we have data from more than 70 countries from the OCDE. One important fact to know is that PISA also tests the performance of students. And that when you take all the countries that are tested, on average, there is no difference in the performance in math of girls and boys. So on average, the performance is the same. In some countries, girls do better. In some countries, girls do worse. In many countries, there is no significant difference between girls and boys. It's usually the case in France. In France, depending on the years, sometimes girls underperform, and sometimes there is no significant difference between girls and boys when it comes to their math performance. On average, no significant difference in performance. Yet, yes? No, go ahead.
The PISA test is testing the performances of students
Yes.
of which grade level?
15 years old. Yeah. So it depends then on the country. Yeah.
I have a question. Sometimes we heard that the difference between girls and boys in mathematics begins at the CP.
Yeah.
So it's a bit, I don't get how it can be
Mhm.
a difference at the CP and the same test, the same result on PISA.
Excellent question. Excellent question. So, the issue with the CP thing. What you are saying, so the difference of levels between girls and boys that starts in CP, so the first year of primary school in France, is actually a new result. So, well, it's a result we've had since 2019. So it's a result provided by actually new testing that was done on the students of that age, and then a gap appeared between girls and boys. So the result of the study, and the study itself is a good and serious study, so the results are actually right. The study itself shows that at the beginning of primary school, the beginning of CP, there is no difference in performance between girls and boys. But 6 months later, so after 6 months of school, your first year of school, then there is a difference, and you have less girls in the better performers in math. So we have this result. The interesting thing is that this particular result became widely known. It's been, I'm sure many of you have seen it, it's been everywhere in the press. Especially so, it was published twice. So it's been published by a very influential institute, which is the L'Institut d'économie de Paris. And so this is done by my colleagues who are economists. I don't know how, yeah, probably. And so they published it once as a working paper back in 2019, and it was published, and it was in Le Monde and in Libération and everything. And then this year, the same results was published in Nature. And so again, you had press conferences and everything. So I'm very jealous of the press power that they have. But at the same time, it's an interesting social fact. Why do, I'm sure you have the same in your field, why do some results have such a press and others don't? Sometimes one particular result has a huge importance. Again, the paper is strong, there is nothing wrong with it. But what became of it in the press and then from the general public leads to the question you ask. Now everybody believes that girls start losing points in CP, and we all assume that then it goes on. But no, Absolutely not. Actually, we have no evidence for now that there is an effect, a lasting effect, that they underperform later on. For now, the results we have from middle school and high school show that it actually goes up and down. At some point they do better, then they do worse, then they do better, then they do worse. And now, I think the most consistent result we have is that there is no significant difference. And also this particular result about CP has been, I think, rightly nuanced by, there was a report made by the Inspection des Finances and the Inspection de l'Éducation about women and math, and I think that they said quite wisely that this result has been overblown when you consider that actually the difference of level is very small, so it's a few points. Secondly, that the sex difference is actually ridiculous compared to the class difference, because no one's talking about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And then third, that this underperforming of girls may be caused by the addition of testing mechanism. Because we have results from psychology showing that the more testing you do and the more stressing the testing is, the more girls and other minorities in science underperform. This is called the phenomenon of the threat stereotype, la menace du stéréotype, and it's a discovery by in psychology. When you belong to a social group, and when there is a stereotype that you are bad at something, for instance math, then when you come under stressful conditions where your capacity is tested, you underperform. This has been proven by a very famous test, you may have heard about it, where you have the same testing in children. It's the very same test. You say to one group, this is a drawing test. You say to the other group, this is a geometry test. When you say it's drawing, girl overperform, boys underperform. And when you say it's geometry, boys overperform, girls underperform. This has been replicated for other social inequalities, and it's stronger if you say the stereotype beforehand. So there was an interesting study about MIT students, and so my colleagues in psychology, proved that you can make very good MIT students underperform on a test if you go and say and tell them beforehand, this particular exercise, we know that Asian students do better, and then all the white students underperform. So, well, we have interesting psychology phenomena going on here. And so there is an hypothesis, but we don't know, that the underperformance of girls in CP could also be caused by the adding of evaluations and testings that are more stressful. All in all, I think it is safe to say that the consensus for now is that there is no significant difference of performance between girls and boys in schools. But as you can see, very, very tricky question. So, considering the absence of a performance difference, there is a difference in attitude, so in the way that the kids see themselves. And so the girls are in orange there, and having the same results as the boys, they say, they tend to say that they are not good at math. They don't say as much that they have good grades, but as you can see, the difference is especially for these 3 items. Girls say way less than boys than they learn fast, that they've always done well, but also that they understand even when it's complicated. So there is a difference of attitude towards the subject. And this is pretty much the same result, but in a different study. And this is for younger girls, 13 to 14 years old. The study is the equivalent of PISA, but it's less known. It's called TEAMS. It's pretty much the same, but for younger students. And there, it's again an international study. On this graph, you have on this axe the the percentile, the score, I'm not going to be able to translate that, the percentile, well, it gives you an indication of the position of the students in their country. So when you have the worst students, they are the worst, they get the worst grades in their country, and when you get to the top, they get to the top 10% of the students of their country. And here you have students saying, I am good at math. So it's a relation between their actual performance and their propensity to say, yeah, I'm good. Quite logically, the better the students, the more they say, yeah, I'm good. But as you can see, boys in green, compared with girls in orange, boys say they are good even when they are not, way more than girls, and the two lines join, so boys and girls have the same confidence in their skills, only when girls are part of the 10% top students in their country. So you have to be super, super good as a girl to allow yourself to say, well, yes, all right, I'm good. So just to say, we have many studies like that, many results like that. I picked 2, I could have 10 more. So this proves that, well, yes, girls do lack self-confidence. And since this is a really nice explanation for the problem we have, again, it's been everywhere, and it's been given a lot of press. So the storytelling, the language about self-censorship, censoring yourself, self-doubt, has been everywhere, and we've had, especially in the general press, a lot of articles using it. So I picked 2. This is Le Monde, and this is, I think, Le Parisien. But there were many others. And you have titles like Stereotypes and Self-Censorship, Why So Few Girls Aspire to Work in Digital, or again, girls often censor themselves, they avoid science, they are afraid of failing. Here, if you bring back the corpus analysis and we do a little bit of text analysis, what is noticeable in the press extracts that we have when we have this kind of articles is that the girls are always the subjects of the verbs. So girls censor themselves, girls avoid science, girls are afraid of failing. And then an interesting fact is that we have been using the term self-doubt and self-censorship for young girls. When you become an adult, then it's the imposter syndrome. It describes the same thing, but we've been using a kind of different language to mention it. So this is interesting because it's been described as the core reason for the absence of women, but also as the main solution. Because, well, if this is the issue, then it's simple to solve it. Be more confident. Well, I'm sure many of you women have been to events where someone came and told you that. I've seen many of them. It's usually, again, the same type of person, a very important man, who comes and says, girls, you are welcome in math and science. We do not discriminate. Take confidence. Dare. Osez les sciences. So, simple issue, simple fixing. Obviously, this has not been working so well because we know that women lack self-confidence for 2 decades, and as you remember the pancake, this has not helped at all. So part of the study I conducted was actually about these issues. I wanted to know what it was like on the girls' side. And to tell the truth, at the beginning, when I went into the math camp, I figured that I will be meeting the girls who were confident. I mean, they were in the math camp during their holidays, they were super good students. I figured they will be a very short sample of super confident girls. If I understand them, then maybe I will be able to understand why others lack self-confidence. That's not what we found, and it was a little bit surprising actually. When we started the interviews, we realized that the girls we were meeting were actually poster examples of the lack of confidence. That we met 45 of them, and almost, I think, all but one told us that she actually lacked confidence, and that she did not actually feel sure of herself. And So we met them one after another, and I will give examples of that. And just to mention, we changed all the names of the girls, so everyone is anonymized. So we mixed up the names. We picked coherent names, so the names are coherent in their origins and in their age. That's why none of the girl is called Georgette, for instance. So you have coherent name. For the faces, what Claire did, she used some reference pictures. She mixed them up with famous stars from teen TV shows. So we have a mix to anonymize the girls. But all the testimonies that you will see in the speech bubbles are actually what the girls said, because we record the interviews and then we transcribe them verbatim. So as we did the interviews, we started noticing that the girls are completely internalized all the discourse on the lack of self-confidence. And so to provide a first example, this is Magali. Her parents are both math teachers, and average math grades is 19 out of 20, like many of the girls that went to the camp. And yet, she says, I'm really good at math. She is, in the top 10%. She can say, yeah, I'm good. I'm serious. I work hard. I understand things quickly because I often work on the material in advance with my mom. The problem is that to become a researcher, you cannot be afraid of not understanding or not succeeding. And that's a bit hard for me because I don't believe in myself at all and I couldn't do it. So that's one of the many examples when we had a girl who was super good, super at ease. All the researchers in the camp agreed that she was excellent. And yet she had no intention of becoming a mathematician. And one of the main reasons was I could not do it because I'm not confident enough. We had this again and again in the interviews, and we had even discourses that were really the same one that I showed you from the press extract. So we had girls telling us, well, yes, women are actually afraid of going forward, of being daring. They also told us that it's not the boys' fault, that it's ingrained in girls, that we, the girls, they are the one with the prejudices. Or they told us that actually women put up a lot of barriers from themselves, and women say, I don't understand, and I give up, and it's a shame. One of them even told us that the situation of women in science and in math in particular was quite fair, because women had been quite late to math. So you cannot expect to get a good position if you came hundreds of years after men. Well, it's a bit normal. You were late to the party, you wait for your turn. So it seemed normal. Yeah, it's funny, but actually it's actually what we told them. So it's normal that they think that. At that point, my colleague Alice and I were quite intrigued to have this intensity of a lack of self-esteem and confidence from girls who objectively were doing great and on the all probability will continue to do great because they had all seemed well for them. So we started asking during the interviews, we started asking the questions. We started saying, well, apparently all goes well for you. Why do you feel like that? Why do you doubt yourself when it seems to be doing great? And actually, the teenagers were as confused as we were. And they said, I have no idea. I know I should be confident, and yet I'm not. And two examples of that. One from a girl called Lou. So Lou, her father was a math teacher, her mother was a philosophy teacher, and she had 4 brothers. They were a math teacher, and an engineer. One had escaped. And Lou, she was extremely good. She, again, had an average grade of 19 out of 20. And she said, well, I put myself down a lot. And I tell myself, you've got no legitimacy. Why are you doing this? And it's a weird thing. I have this tendency to crumble before men. Yet, my parents are very caring. They make sure that me and my brother, we are treated equally. And my mother is completely independent. She's an incredible role model. So I know it's been put in my head somehow, but I don't know how. And Ségolène, she said the same thing, so 2 separate interviews. She's also from a scientific family with an engineer father and a biology teacher mother. With an 18 out of 20, she is one of the worst students of the lot. And she says, for as long as I can remember, I've always lacked self-confidence. And I don't know why. I don't understand what happened and how I became like that. Because it's easy to know that you should be more confident. And for me, it's even more frustrating because I know I should be, but I cannot seem to break free. And then she goes on about an event she had with some of a teacher, and they all say that their parents are really nice and supporting, that their teachers are really nice and supporting. They even say, we are tired of the math teacher being like, go girls, yes, well thank you, we know, and still. And Ségolène particularly, a math teacher told her after class, well Ségolène, you are one of my best students, I don't know why you don't participate, I don't know why you talk more, I know you have the answers, I know you are a good student. And Ségolène said, she was so nice and I just broke and cried and I couldn't do anything about it. And this came back again and again and again in our interviews. And we had girls who, each and every one of them, individually, told us that they were the problem, individually. And most of them told us that they had psychological issues. And they also told us, I'm sure the others are fine, but I'm anxious, and I'm a perfectionist. And one thing that came back a lot was, no one is putting pressure on me, but I'm putting pressure on myself. Everyone around me is nice. I'm the issue. I'm anxious. I'm too sensible, and I'm not strong enough mentally. So, even if it's not a quantitative study, when you have 40 plus girls who all have super good grades in math and who each individually tell you that something is wrong with their head, you suspect that maybe there are some social structures and laws at work. Obviously, my colleagues and I, we had an hypothesis on the cause of the lack of confidence. We thought that probably the girls had been met with resistance at some point, that at some point someone had told them that they were not legitimate, that they were not welcome in math or science, that they were not good enough. And so we tried to ask them during the interview, and the question we asked was, have you personally experienced or witnessed sexism? And this question came quite late in the interview. When we asked that question, the answer we had was, it came back a lot, things like, I don't think so. Well, I hear comments, but it's ironic. Or no, it doesn't come to mind. Well, we get comments sometimes, but it's just joking. Or no, honestly, well, must have heard jokes. Well, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it gets heavy, and it's not funny anymore. Or, well, it's usually fine, just small episodes, like little remarks that are supposed to be ironic. So mostly the answer was, no, that's fine. Well, maybe this small joke thing that happened. And the fun fact is I did an interview with a female mathematician 3 days ago, asked the same question, then the answer was exactly the same. No, never had any issues. Well, and then. What we did then with my colleague is used a technique that we have in sociology when we are trying to study discrimination, where you ask questions in a two-timing technique. First, you ask something very broad like that. Have you ever experienced any sexism, racism, anything like that? And then you get a first answer, and then you go back with a more specific question. So either you use a list of acts that are actually considered discriminations, especially in the French and the European law. So for instance, if you are studying racism, then you can ask, have you ever been asked to an interview or to an apartment visit and then been rejected after then seen your face or heard your name? You can ask specific questions like that. Or have you ever been insulted in the street by someone? Things like that. Or when you are doing qualitative interviews, that's the advantage of these techniques, then you can go back to something that the person said a little while before. For instance, if a girl said, oh, my teachers were always so nice and so supportive, well, except, no, they were always so nice. Then you can go back later and say, what about the one who wasn't? What about the one you seem to have had a problem with? So we did that. We tried and find in the interviews what was behind the little jokes, what was behind the exceptions. In the end, the results we got using this two-time questioning was quite different from the first picture that the girls painted. Because when the interviews went on, we collected so many examples of interactions that the girls had had, and I only provide a small sample of the interactions because they could not all be fitted in the image that Claire drew. So these are things that we know were said to those 16 years old. They have been told things like, I'm starting here at the top left, please avoid dressing like a slut for math class. But also just stay inside and let the boys play outside. Or let's not question everything because there was maybe one woman in science history. It's Marie Curie, by the way. Or Émilie du Châtelet, if you're a mathematician. I'm obviously more intelligent than you, or I didn't think you were clever. This one came back again and again. You don't look like someone who would be good at math. Or good thing we finally had a boy. Or, well, girls, if you're struggling, it's normal. You're less capable than boys of solving this problem. Well, I'm a man, it's normal for me to look at girls' asses. Please fold his laundry, he doesn't know how to do it. Well, you're a girl and you should help him. Or, you got a better grade, but you're a girl, that doesn't count. And if you look at the opposite diagonal, then you've got, it's easier for you to get good grades as a girl. And in the same category of any way you play, you lose, you've got, I don't need to go to math camp to be reassured, or why would you get into the math camp? At this point, you may have noticed that there are colors for the bubbles, and each color represents a type of person in the girl's life. So can you guess what type of person in their lives say the things in yellow? For instance, calm down with your feminism, or modern women's tragedy is that they want it all, or the things about looking at girls. The family. It's parents, but also uncles and grandparents, and sometimes aunts as well. This is a stepfather. What about the blue one? Women don't believe in everything, and a very classic one, are you sure you did it yourself? Teachers. This one, the are you sure you did this yourself, came back again and again, especially for girls in computer science classes. I finished the exercise, the exercise first. Are you sure you did it yourself? Did he help you? He hasn't even finished. You never know. And what about the red bubbles? How did I lose against the girl? It's normal that men earn more because we are superior. Girls are weak. Why are you here? And how did you get that top grade? Did you sleep with the teacher? Yeah, the friends, the camarades, the boys in their classes. So as you can see, it comes from everywhere, family, friends, teacher, more so from the boys in their class, their friends, their peers. And as you can see, some of it is directly linked with science, such as there's been no women in science, or I'm more intelligent than you, or why are you going to the math camp? Some of it may seem quite far away from the issue of math and science, like stay inside, or like it's okay for me to look at your body. But if you think about it, it's quite linked, because it's another way of saying you are not supposed to be here. And especially, for instance, the stay inside, it's again reinforces the idea that, well, a woman is supposed to stay in her home and not go around the world and not go and try and create new knowledge or experience things. The thing about your body, and actually we were talking about it earlier with the group, it's the idea that your body will be looked at all the time, constantly, and that it's a normal thing, and that you can never be actually a mind. You are always a sexualized body. So it may seem quite far away and quite a far stretch from the problem we have in math and science, and yet, since when we do conferences, it's actually something that involves the body a lot, and yet we try to pretend it doesn't, which is, especially in math, it doesn't matter what you look like, except if you are women, actually. And so this kind of interaction is a way to teach girls that they will not escape this. So at this point, these are results from the qualitative study. I must mention that none of these are jokes or little remarks. All of these interactions are actually what the French law considers to be sexual insults. It's in the law, and this is repeated. This is what the law defines as sexual harassment. So it's not only jokes. And as I was saying, this is the qualitative results, but we have damning evidence from quantitative studies that this is not the exception. What we know, from quantitative studies is that almost 20% of high school girls said they received this kind of sexist insults during their school time. It's only 2% of boys. We also know that 10% of them experience inappropriate sexual behavior. What we know from recent studies is that the more you advance in your science studies, the more exposed you actually are to sexist or sexual violence. We have results on engineer schools where 10% of students say they have been assaulted. I'm sure you've heard about it, but we've had results also from Polytechnique and Centrale Supélec where studies showed that almost a quarter, and that's a huge number, almost a quarter of their students have been sexually assaulted during their stay in the school. And then we have studies for adult women showing, for instance, it's been quite known, the L'Oréal and Ipsos study showing that half of female scientists have experienced sexual harassment, and that's actually a little bit more than female workers in all fields. And finally, that women in tech are even more exposed. That's an American study actually showing that 60% of them face sexual harassment. Yes?
I do have a question. Like, data about like female being sexually harassed.
Yeah.
Is the contrast between working women and women working in research due to the fact that maybe there is a vast difference between these kind of women and that like female researchers would be better able to understand when they're sexually assaulted than working like female workers?
We don't know. It's hard to interpret the figures, especially because the definition of harassment has changed. So sometimes it's hard to follow it in time because the definition has changed. Do women from the higher classes recognize sexism better? Evidence points to no. Research rather shows that women are strangely equal when it comes to class before sexist and particularly, for instance, conjugal violence. So to my knowledge, no research indicates that there would be a better understanding of violence when you are in a better social position. But it's safe to say we're not sure.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
So you said it was in the first remarks or answers that you got,
Yeah.
you said, oh, there may be just a single remark
Yeah.
sometime. So to what extent are these things repeated or isolated? So if one says 18%, for instance, insult, is this one insult over their skull, or is this repeated several times?
If the words are used carefully, normally receive a sexist insult. Did it happen once? And when we talk about sexual harassment, it's when it's repeated and by the same person. So the question asked to students is, did it happen once? And for instance, for this result, it's did it happen several times? Did you have a follow-up? Yeah. This means they received at least one.
So, but then for the younger girls,
Yes.
where you already observed
Yeah.
a large amount of lack of confidence.
Yeah.
So does this mean that just a single remark that they could have had during their school time could already make that they lack of confidence, or should there still be some kind of repetition to get this thing?
I think this is where this is a case where the causal link should not be made this easily. We cannot say one sexist insult causes a loss of confidence by, I don't know. We actually don't know, and I think any tentative to measure that quantitatively, in my opinion, is not very serious, because how do you quantify? We talk a lot about confidence. We have no way of quantifying confidence, like, truly. So is it one time or is it repeated? I actually would not make myself the causal link. You are insulted once, you lack confidence. I think it's safe to make a correlation, at least. And also, I think it's safe to assume that when you are insulted, even once, it is enough. I think we have experienced it, maybe all of us. It is enough to make you feel that you are not welcome there. But yeah, it's not a direct causation that we can say just once is enough to make you drop it. Someone wanted to react, yes.
So your brothers, the content
Yeah.
of the brothers, is that considered the sexist insult?
By the French law, yes.
But you had all the girls have
Yes.
that, and here 18% is kind of, it seems low.
Yeah, it seems low because of the phenomenon I mentioned, which is here, it's a qualitative study. So all the girls would have probably crossed no in the quantitative study if they were alone in front of the questionnaire. So that explains also, that's why we have such a hard time getting data on violence, because most of violence is not recognized as violence, absolutely. And that's actually the final point I wanted to make. So were there any other remark? Because otherwise, that was kind of my final point, which is that the issue we have is that girls, and then most of women, do not have the tools and the words to recognize violence when it happens. And so what research points to is that there is a lot of violence going on, but very few of these events are actually identified and reported as such. And that explains the difference between the data. So we have women, girls and women, who are deprived of the means they could have to identify, to name, to describe gender-based violence. And specifically, I'm sure if you've experienced high school, you remember events where some boys were mean to some girls, and then an adult said, "Don't pay attention, they are just kiddings." And as you know, puberty comes later for boys, so they are immature. Don't pay attention. Be the bigger girl. They are just joking, and boys will be boys. It's interesting to point out that we say to teenage girls that boys will be boys and they are too immature and it's not their fault. Then you go to the other end of the spectrum to adult women in math labs, for instance, and then we are told, they are old. We cannot change them anymore. You know him. He's always been like that. So the excuse is always promptly given. What we know is that this kind of violence is actually very common in high schools, but that, yeah, they are usually justified. Girls also lack the scientific knowledge that would enable them to understand it, because as I mentioned, for instance, the girls, remember, who said, well, women came late into math, so it's only fair game that they are not the majority. You can only think that if you have no knowledge of the women who were actually in math, and we have, I won't tackle that today, but we have more and more research showing that women were there in science and that they were deliberately erased from much of the history in all the disciplines. And so that's the other thing that's lacking. It's also spaces and tools to defend themselves against discrimination. And so the conclusion that I wanted to make today about this issue of sexism is that if we consider all that I said, we see that we are not in a situation of self-censorship we are in a situation when girls are actually censored. Also, they are not victims of stereotypes, but of actual sexist violence. And finally, that the issue is not a lack of self-confidence, it's that they are actually systematically deprived of it because their abilities is constantly denied. And to sum it all up, Claire, for the book, made this drawing that I think is useful to understanding the issue. So that at first you've got this violence in the form of insults or worse. Sometimes it's a blatant aggression. Things like girls are weak, it's not for you. And that, it makes you feel bad, it makes you feel incompetent, and even one insult can do that. But I think the most important step that we tend to ignore is the denial. It's the fact that we tell girls in this case that nothing happened and that we actually live in a very equal society, especially in France. We are the country of women's rights and equality and everything. And that creates the final situation of incorporating guilt and lacking self-confidence and feeling like an imposter and everything. And so as a way forward, obviously, the advice is to try and act on the first step and not only on the fourth one. Yes, it's good to provide women with spaces and ways to feel better, but if you never stop the gender-based violence, then it's useless to try and solve the confidence issue. And I will stop here for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the nice talk. Are there more questions? Yes.
Is it as hard to, how can I phrase this? So you said it's hard to recognize violence, right?
Yeah.
Is it as hard to recognize victimization? So is it dual? Like, is it? How can we make sure that someone is victimizing versus the same thing? I mean, someone is like saying violent things,
yes,
right? And someone is victimizing him or herself.
What are
Does
you
it
calling
make sense?
victimizing?
I don't know. Maybe somebody feels that he's being violated, or or he's not, or he's like receiving violence.
Yes.
Whereas he's not, or she's not.
Yes.
It's the same thing. Like one is doing and the other is receiving. We've hard time recognizing the one direction. Do we have the same hard time recognizing the other way around?
The thing is, I think victimization, to my knowledge, is not a social phenomenon that we observe at large, for instance, in this setting. So we do not have, we have many examples of violence, and violence is defined by the common law that we have, for instance, in France and in Europe. So we know we have a legal definition of what is a sexist insult, for instance, as an insult that tries to diminish someone based on their gender. For instance, there is no such thing about victimization. So first, it's not the same thing, because then you don't have an objective definition to refer to. So, and to my knowledge, victimization, and I'm guessing that you mean, for instance, women crying wolf, right? Saying they are victimized when they are not. This is very anecdotal. This barely happens. So it's not it cannot be treated as a
asymmetric.
as a symmetrical phenomenon.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Well, thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting, and it confirms somehow what I feel. It's like I mean, we see we're mathematics and we're speaking about that or computer science, but it's really a society problem. Mm-hmm. And as you just showed, the problem is that the first system, and the first system is far before what we are dealing with at university, for instance, or this kind of thing.
Sure.
And somehow when I think about that, I'm always thinking like, well, it's already too late somehow for these people. Mm-hmm. and so it's a bit demoralizing somehow because yes, well, we can try to fight that afterward, but it's somehow too late. And so this is why we think, well, what could we do? But actually, except a political solution, I mean, on the whole society, I don't see a good answer. I can see like a partial answer, but not a good one.
I mean, is it too late? Yes and no. Obviously, many things happen before women actually get to, for instance, a PhD or even a position. And yet so much happens after. So this study was about teenagers. I mean, it's the study I did, and I think it's also the study I use because I think it's interesting. I talk about teenagers, so it doesn't involve any of us really, because they are teens. And then when you realize it's talking about you, hopefully you understood some things. Actually, right now I'm doing a study on adults and on researchers and mathematicians. The same things are going on later on. You have a huge amount of gender-based violence between your PhD and your professorship. And we'll talk about elitism tomorrow, but some women are actually protected by their social background. Some came from very prestigious families and university, and usually they don't encounter a lot of sexism for a long time, or they don't recognize it because it doesn't impede their progress. And then when they got to the professorship, all hell breaks loose. And then it's the same thing that happens to the teenagers, but it happens to 40 or 50 years old women. So yeah, there is a lot of gender-based violence still happening in the professional world of math and other science as well. So yes, structural and policies are needed to make a big change, but if we started where we are, and if we already reduced the violence that actually happens in all of our professional contexts, and they do happen a lot in math in particular, then it would already be a first step and it would make things better. So everybody thinks that the blame is to be put on the step before. In universities we say it's high school. In high school they say, but you don't know, everything happened in middle school. And in middle school they're like, inequalities start in CP. And then it's like, well, but the kindergarten, oh la la. So yeah, yes, it happens at every step, but it continues and it's reinforced at every step also.
Yes, last question. And maybe if I can just add, I know nothing about this topic, but I will just add that, as we saw, political choices make a difference as well.
Yeah.
So
yes.
See for who you vote.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture. I was wondering, like just to make an analogy, like during COVID we had like so-called super spreaders, which like caused not the majority, but at least a significant part of the spread. If you would make the same thing here, so say the general population perhaps don't do as much sexism, whatever, but then there are a few instances or few people that do a lot. How big is the impact of the people that would do a lot versus the general population? Does it make sense?
Yes. To my knowledge, we don't know. We don't know if it's actually the responsibility of a few bad apples or, I suspect it's not, because the bad apples hypothesis is what everyone says. It's you go into a school, you go into a lab, it's always Gérard. Gérard. No, the data shows it's not possible. It's not one guy. So the hypothesis, we have no data, but the hypothesis is that it's way more widely spread, that it's not a few bad sexists. And what we know, it's also that further than the one actually committing the insults, the issue we have is with everyone who does not react. And this is the majority, and this is a huge issue, the ventre mou, as we would say in France. So the people who are not actively insulting or harassing or even assaulting, but who don't say anything. And so this we know is the majority, and in my opinion, this should be an important target too for change. So if you are not the one doing the assaulting, then maybe you are the one not saying anything, and this goes for both men and women. And so if everyone who's not doing anything starting fighting back, it would make things, I think, a lot better.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot. We have a break now for coffee and more discussions. Thank you.